Guys, today I want to talk about the concept of owning your story. This is so important. I see so many entrepreneurs, they run from their story because they don't want to talk about it. And that was me early on in my career. But here's what I realized. You have to own your story without your story owning you. What do I mean by that? At the end of the day, the story that you continuously tell yourself is what's going to shape you down the road. And yeah, we can't control our past, but we can sure impact our story and how it changes our future. You know, I remember back growing up, I was 13 or 14 years old and I was, again, really sick with Crohn's as a huge part of my story. And I remember going to the doctor and I was feeling really down and feeling really defeated. And they did my growth charts and I was on the 0 percentile or 1 percentile for height, 1 percentile for weight. And I left the room and the doctor talked to my mom and I came back in and the doctor said, look, we have to tube feed every night for a year. So what does that mean? He says, well, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have to take a little tube and before bed every single night, you're going to have to put the tube up your nose yourself and feed it into your stomach. You're going to have to feed yourself 6 cans of Boost to get that extra 3,000 or 4,000 calories. I remember when he told me that was a tough day. I had already felt like I was stacking up the losses. I wasn't growing. I was sick all the time. I was on heavy steroid drugs to just try and keep me regulated. And now I was gonna have to put a tube down my nose and feed myself, 5, 6 cans of Boost a night. And, there was gonna be no sleepovers. I had to have this big machine beside my bed on a pole every single night. And I'll be honest, guys, my story was starting to own me. And I started to feel like a sick kid. I started to feel like a broken child in terms of my health. And I started to see myself differently. And I thought, well, I'm not like everybody else. And all these thoughts started to get in my head. And I realized at 14 years old that I needed to change the narrative. I needed to start to change the story that I was telling myself because I didn't like the way that it was making me feel. And I don't know if it was one of my parents who helped me snap out of it or a mentor. I can't remember that far back, but there was something that shifted inside of me where I went from that, oh my God, is this who I am, to how am I going to leverage this story moving forward? And I remember through that year, I made the best of it, right? I started to play tricks with my tube when friends would come over to my house and, I turned into something positive and, I didn't let it bother me as much as I could have. And, it turned out to be okay. I ended up growing 8 inches in a summer because of that. So everything ended up good. But at the end of the day, your story helps shape who you are. And you got to be very careful how you're telling yourself that story, let alone how you're telling it to other people. See, we all have the opportunity to reframe it. What do I mean by that? I mean that our past doesn't dictate the future. However, it can shape us into who we are today. So one of the most important things with your story is you have to maintain healthy emotional boundaries around your story. I know that some of you guys watching this had a dark past. I know you've been through some crazy stuff, but you have to maintain a healthy emotional boundary around that story. Every setback in your past is an opportunity for a comeback in the future. If you think about it, your story is what makes you relatable. A mentor of mine many years ago, I was on stage and I was doing a presentation and for a group of 100 people and I was talking about our company and our expansion. And he pulled me off the side of the stage after and he says, what are you doing? I said, selling the dream, building a business. He says, why don't you ever talk about your story? I said, because I don't really like to talk about that part of my life. I don't really like to talk about my struggles. He said, Steve, that's what makes you relatable. That's what draws people to you. See, everybody watching this right now, you need to understand that everybody that you know, everybody that you're trying to recruit, everybody that you're trying to sell to, everybody that you're trying to influence or reach or touch, every single person has a story of their own. That's what brings you together. That's what connects you. That's what makes you relatable. And people want to do business. They want to be in business with people that have the ability to tell their story in a way where it's helping shape them into the future. Obviously, don't tell it in a way that makes you sound like a victim and where your story owns you, but that's what brings you together. That's what attracts the recruit. That's what builds the team is your story. And at the end of the day, when our life is over at age 80 or 90, really what we have is we have this motion picture of our life. So as you're growing and as you're evolving, make sure that you really understand your story. Really make sure that you own it because you only have one. You only have one story. So make it one hell of a story and get really good at telling it and tell it in a way of, well, these are some things that I went through, but here's how we overcame it. Make it relatable. And I'll tell you what, it's really going to change your mindset and change your narrative. You know, unfortunately, we're in the people business, and I meet people all the time that are just so stuck in the past. They're so tied to the old story. Their old story just owns them. They just keep getting beaten down by it, and the way they tell their story is this victim, poor me, right? Oh, it's happening to me again, and bad things always happen, and that doesn't work. So you got to own your story. You got to be able to think about it differently. You have to be able to speak about it differently. You have to give different meaning to it, and you have to build off of it. And just realize that's what makes you unique. If you took away all my rings, all my watches, my house, my car, if you took everything away from me that I owned, the only thing that I have left is my story. It's something that nobody can ever take away from me. So you better own it so that it doesn't own you. All right, you guys. We'll see you on the next one.